the most hardcore morning routines in medieval France, and more. Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about how people stayed clean in 13th century France. And I say stayed clean because despite what you might think, medieval people actually cared quite a bit about being clean. They just had to deal with the small problem of not having running water, affordable soap, or really any of the things we take for granted when we stumble to the bathroom at 6 a.m. So get comfortable, because we're about to spend the next 2 hours learning exactly how a medieval French peasant managed to wash their face without dying of exposure, and why a nobleman's morning routine involved more servants than a modern spa. It's the kind of detailed historical knowledge that absolutely no one needs to know at this level of detail, which makes it perfect for drifting off to sleep while learning something completely useless about the past. Part 1. The morning routine, 0 to 20 minutes. Let's start with how people began their day, because even in the 1200s, people had to wash their faces and comb their hair before facing the world. The difference was that some people did this with cold water and a chunk of soap that could probably strip paint, while others had servants heating rose water in silver bowls. Every single person in medieval France, from the lowliest serf to the king himself, washed their hands and face each morning. They combed their hair twice a day. They cleaned their teeth after meals. These weren't optional activities. They were just basic human maintenance, the same way we brush our teeth without thinking about it. But here's where it gets interesting in that deeply boring way that medieval life always does. A peasant's morning routine went something like this. You wake up, probably because a rooster is making noise outside your one-room house. You stumble over to a wooden basin, assuming you own one, which most people did because even poor people need bowls for things. You pour in some cold water from whatever container you used to collect water the day before, and then you splash this water on your face and hands, using a piece of soap that you probably made yourself from wood ash and animal fat. The soap, by the way, was not gentle. Medieval soap, made from lye and tallow, was essentially the cleaning equivalent of sandpaper. It got things clean, sure, but it also removed approximately 3 layers of skin in the process. You'd rub this harsh soap between your hands, work up what passed for a lather, and scrub your face and hands until they were red and raw, but technically clean. After washing, you'd dry yourself with whatever piece of linen you had available. If you were lucky, it was a dedicated drying cloth. If you weren't, well, you used part of your shirt or just air-dried, depending on the season and how much you enjoyed the feeling of water freezing on your skin. Now, let's compare this to how a nobleman started his day, because the difference is almost comical. A wealthy noble didn't wash himself. That would be undignified. Instead, servants would prepare a silver or copper basin filled with warm water. Not just warm, but heated to the perfect temperature and often scented with rose water or other expensive additions. The water itself was a production. Servants had to heat it over fires, carry it upstairs if the noble lived in a castle, and have it ready at precisely the right moment. The basin was polished and clean. There were multiple clean linen towels available, not the rough hemp cloth that peasants used, but fine, soft linen that felt pleasant against the skin. The soap was imported. While peasants used whatever they could make locally, nobles could afford Castile soap, made with olive oil from Spain, or even more exotic varieties from the Middle East. These soaps were gentle, they smelled good, and they cost about 10 times what a peasant would pay for basic soap. Some nobles used soap that cost more than a peasant family's entire monthly income. The entire process was overseen by professional servants, whose job it was to assist with washing and grooming. There were people whose entire career consisted of making sure noblemen washed their faces properly. Think about that for a moment. Someone's life's work was heating water and holding towels for someone else's morning routine. But here's what's really fascinating about all this. Both the peasant and the noble understood that washing your face was important. They both did it every single day. The peasant didn't skip washing because it was unpleasant or because soap was harsh. The noble didn't do it more often because he had better facilities. They both just accepted that this was part of being a functional human being, and they worked within whatever constraints they had. The difference was purely economic. The peasant's entire morning washing routine cost essentially nothing. Water was free, homemade soap cost a few pennies worth of materials, and the time investment was maybe 5 minutes. The noble's routine cost significantly more and involved multiple people, but it was still the same basic activity: applying water and soap to the face to remove dirt and grease. Medieval people also understood that this needed to be done every day. This wasn't a weekly thing or something you did when you felt particularly dirty. Daily face washing was standard across all social classes. They had figured out, through centuries of trial and error, that daily maintenance was easier than trying to clean off several days' worth of accumulated grime. Part 2. The Great Bathing Divide, 20 to 40 minutes. Now we come to bathing, which is where the differences between rich and poor really become obvious. Because while everyone washed their face daily, full-body bathing was a much more complicated undertaking that required serious planning, significant resources, and a tolerance for either extreme discomfort or extreme luxury, depending on your social position. Let's start with peasants, because their bathing experience was basically an exercise in making the best of a difficult situation. Most peasants bathed about twice a month when they could afford it, although this varied significantly based on the season, their work schedule, and whether they could gather the necessary resources. The typical peasant bath was conducted in the following manner. You would take a wooden half barrel, or, if you were lucky, a proper wooden tub that your family had owned for generations. You place this near your fire, because the only way you'll have warm water is if you heat it yourself. Then begins the process of heating enough water to fill the tub, which requires a significant amount of fuel and time. You start heating water in whatever pots you own, which probably aren't very large. So you're looking at heating water in small batches and transferring it to the tub bit by bit. Each pot takes time to heat, and you need enough water to actually submerge your body. So this is easily a 2 or 3 hour process just to prepare for bathing. Once you have a tub of warm water, you need to bathe quickly because the water will cool down quickly. There's no insulation, no way to reheat the water once you're in it, so you're racing against physics to get clean before the water becomes unpleasantly cold. The soap situation is the same harsh lye soap we talked about earlier, except now you're applying it to your entire body, which is about as comfortable as it sounds. You scrub quickly and efficiently, rinse off as best you can, and then you're done, until the next time you can afford to go through this entire process again. However, here's the thing that modern people often fail to understand. Peasants didn't avoid bathing because they didn't value cleanliness. They avoided frequent bathing because it was genuinely expensive and time-consuming. The fuel alone to heat bath water could cost a significant portion of a day's wages. The time investment meant taking several hours away from other necessary work and the physical discomfort was real. Bathing in winter was particularly unpleasant, when your only heat source was a small fire and your house had no insulation. Now let's talk about how nobles bathed, because this was an entirely different experience that bordered on the theatrical. Noble bathing wasn't just about getting clean. It was a social event, a display of wealth, and a form of entertainment, all rolled into one. First, the preparation. Servants would set up a wooden tub, but not just any wooden tub. These were custom-made pieces of furniture, often lined with linen for added comfort, and sometimes featuring tent-like coverings to retain heat and provide privacy. The tub itself might be decorated, and it was definitely large enough for an adult to sit comfortably. The water was heated in significant quantities by servants whose job it was to manage the complex logistics of noble bathing. We're talking about enough hot water to fill a large tub, all heated to the right temperature, and transported to wherever the noble wanted to bathe. Some castles had dedicated bathing rooms, while others set up portable bathing arrangements wherever was convenient. But here's where it gets really elaborate. The water wasn't just hot, it was enhanced. Nobles would add rose petals, herbs, scented oils, and other expensive substances to their bathwater. Some recipes survive from medieval sources that describe incredibly complex bath preparations involving multiple types of flowers, exotic spices, and imported oils that cost more than most people's annual income. The bathing process itself was attended by servants. There were people whose job it was to help wash the noble's back, to pour water for rinsing, to provide clean towels, and to make sure the temperature was comfortable throughout the bathing process. Some nobles even had entertainment during bathing. Musicians, storytellers, or companions who would sit nearby and provide conversation. After bathing, there were more servants to help with drying, applying oils or perfumes, and getting dressed in clean clothes. The whole experience could take several hours and involve a dozen different people, all to accomplish the same basic goal that a peasant achieved in 20 minutes, with a wooden tub and harsh soap. The frequency was different too. While peasants bathed twice a month when possible, nobles bathed weekly, or even more often. Some sources describe nobles who bathed multiple times per week, though this was considered somewhat excessive, even by medieval standards. The economic difference was staggering. A noble's weekly bath cost more than most peasants earned in a month. The servants, the fuel, the special soaps and additives, the dedicated facilities, all of this added up to an expense that was completely out of reach for ordinary people. But again, both groups understood that bathing was important for health and cleanliness. The difference wasn't in knowledge or desire, but in the resources available to make bathing comfortable, rather than a grim ordeal to be endured as infrequently as possible. Part 3. Teeth, hair, and daily maintenance, 40 to 60 minutes. Medieval people cared about their teeth, which might surprise you, given that dentistry consisted mostly of pull it out with pliers and hope you don't die of infection. But they had developed reasonably effective methods for keeping their teeth clean, though once again, the quality of these methods depended entirely on how much money you had. Let's start with peasant dental care, which was surprisingly systematic, given the available resources. Every peasant cleaned their teeth after meals, not with toothbrushes, those didn't exist yet, but with pieces of rough linen cloth. You'd wrap the cloth around your finger and rub your teeth to remove food particles and plaque. For more thorough cleaning, peasants used coarse salt as an abrasive. You'd put a pinch of salt on your cloth and scrub your teeth with it, which was effective at removing stains and buildup, though probably not great for your tooth enamel. Salt was relatively expensive for peasants, but not so expensive that they couldn't use small amounts for dental care. They also chewed on hazel twigs to clean their teeth. You'd take a fresh hazel twig, chew on one end until it frayed into something resembling a brush, and then use this to scrub your teeth. This method was completely free if you lived near hazel trees, and it was actually quite effective. The frayed wood fibers worked like a primitive toothbrush, and hazel has natural antibacterial properties. For breath freshening and additional cleaning, peasants made rinses from local herbs. Sage was particularly popular. They'd steep sage leaves in hot water, let it cool, and use it as a mouth rinse. Mint was also common when available. These herbal rinses cost essentially nothing if you could grow or forage the herbs yourself. Some peasants made crude tooth powders by combining salt with burned herbs. They'd take sage leaves, burn them until they were completely charred, grind the charcoal into powder, mix it with salt, and use this as a tooth powder. Medieval recipes survive that describe exactly this process, suggesting it was a common practice. Now let's talk about noble dental care, which was elaborate to the point of being ridiculous. Nobles had access to professional dental services from barber surgeons, imported tooth powders made with exotic spices, and specialized tools made from expensive materials. Noble tooth powders were works of art. Instead of burned herbs and salt, they used combinations of imported cinnamon, ground cloves, exotic salts from distant regions, and other spices that cost more than a peasant's monthly income. These powders were not only effective at cleaning teeth, but also left a pleasant taste and freshened breath. They used fine linen cloths instead of rough hemp, which was gentler on the gums and more effective at cleaning. Some nobles had silver toothpicks custom made for removing food particles, and these became decorative items, as well as functional tools. When problems arose, nobles could afford professional treatment from barber surgeons who specialized in dental care. These practitioners could extract teeth using proper tools, rather than improvised implements, and they had access to pain-numbing substances and techniques for preventing infection. But here's what's really interesting. Archaeological analysis of medieval teeth shows that tooth decay was actually less common in the medieval period than in later centuries. This was largely because sugar was extremely rare and expensive, so most people's diets didn't include the kinds of foods that cause rapid tooth decay. Even peasants with their crude dental care methods often had healthier teeth than wealthy people in the 18th or 19th centuries who had access to sugar, but not effective dental care. Hair care followed the same pattern of universal practice with class-based quality differences. Everyone combed their hair twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening. This wasn't optional. It was considered basic hygiene and social necessity. Peasant hair care was straightforward. You owned a wooden comb, probably hand-carved and passed down through your family. These combs had wide teeth for detangling and were purely functional. No decoration, no fancy materials, just a piece of carved wood that did the job. Hair washing for peasants happened about once a month, using the same harsh lye soap they used for everything else. This soap was effective at removing dirt and grease, but it was also extremely drying, so frequent use would damage hair. Once a month was about as often as you could wash your hair with lye soap without causing serious damage. Between washings, peasants managed their hair by braiding it and covering it with cloth caps or veils. This served multiple purposes. It kept hair clean longer, it prevented tangles, and it met social expectations about hair covering, especially for married women. Noble hair care, on the other hand, was an elaborate ritual involving specialized tools, professional services, and expensive products. Nobles owned multiple combs made from ivory, bone, or expensive wood, often decorated with religious scenes or family coats of arms. These weren't just functional items. They were status symbols and works of art. Hair washing for nobles happened weekly, using scented lye soap or imported soap products. The water was heated and often scented with herbs or oils. Professional hair servants handled the washing process, ensuring that the hair was thoroughly cleaned without damage. Hair coloring was popular among nobles and involved dangerous, expensive processes. To achieve blonde hair, they used saffron, which was incredibly expensive, literally worth more than its weight in gold. For red hair, they used a substance called dragon's blood, which was actually tree resin, but still costly. Brown hair was achieved using walnut shells, which were more affordable, but still required processing and preparation. These coloring processes took days to complete and involved applying acidic solutions that could cause serious skin damage if not handled carefully. Only wealthy people could afford both the materials and the professional services necessary to color hair safely. The social rules around hair were complex and enforced through both custom and law. Unmarried women could wear their hair uncovered in single braids, while married women were required to cover their hair with veils, coifs, or elaborate headdresses. The quality and style of these head coverings immediately communicated a woman's social status to anyone who saw her. Part 4. Laundry and clothing care, 60 to 80 minutes. Now we come to one of the most time-consuming and physically demanding aspects of medieval hygiene, keeping clothes clean. This was a process that could take an entire day and required strength, skill, and significant resources. Though, as always, the experience varied dramatically, depending on your social position. Let's start with how peasants handled their laundry, because this was truly back-breaking work that most modern people would find almost impossible to endure. Peasant families owned very few clothes, maybe 2 or 3 outfits per person, so keeping these clean was essential, since there weren't alternatives to wear while things were being washed. The basic process began with collecting water, which for laundry meant a lot of water. You needed enough to fill a large wooden tub for washing, plus additional water for rinsing. If you lived near a river or stream, you might do your laundry there to avoid having to transport all that water. If not, you faced the challenge of carrying dozens of gallons of water from the nearest source to your home. Next came the soap preparation. Peasants made their own lye soap from wood ash and animal fat, and laundry required more soap than daily washing. You'd need to have prepared enough soap in advance, or you'd spend part of your laundry day making soap, which was itself a time-consuming process, involving boiling fat and ash together until they formed a crude soap. The actual washing process was called bucking, and it was exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. You'd soak the clothes in a lye solution for several hours, then take them to a flat stone or wooden board and beat them with wooden paddles. The beating served to force dirt out of the fabric, but it also wore out clothes quickly and required considerable physical strength. After beating, you'd scrub the clothes by hand, working the soap into the fabric and rubbing particularly dirty areas against rough surfaces. This process removed ground-in dirt and stains, but it was hard on both the clothes and the person doing the scrubbing. Your hands would be raw from the lye soap and constant immersion in water. Rinsing required multiple changes of clean water to remove all the soap residue. Since soap was made with lye, Leaving soap in clothes would cause skin irritation when worn. You'd rinse, wring out by hand, rinse again, wring out again, and repeat until the water ran clear. Drying was weather dependent and could take days. Clothes were hung on bushes, spread on grass, or draped over whatever surfaces were available. In wet weather, clothes might be hung inside near the fire, but this increased the fire risk and made the house smoky and humid. The entire process, from start to finish, took 6 to 8 hours of hard physical labor. Most peasant families did major laundry only once a month, or even less frequently, depending on the season and their work schedule. In winter, when clothes took longer to dry and water was harder to heat, laundry might be done only a few times per year. The economic cost was significant too. The fuel needed to heat water and the time spent on laundry represented a substantial investment for people who lived on the edge of poverty. Peasants often spent 15 to 20% of their annual income on materials and fuel for hygiene, including laundry. Noble laundry was an entirely different operation that resembled a small industrial process, more than household chores. Large noble households employed professional laundresses who earned 15 to 20 pence daily, about 10 times what a general laborer made. These were skilled workers who knew how to handle expensive fabrics without damaging them. Noble estates had dedicated laundry areas with stone washing basins, proper drainage systems, and multiple work surfaces designed specifically for laundry. These facilities included areas for soaking, washing, rinsing, and drying, with everything laid out for maximum efficiency. The soap used for noble laundry was high-quality Castile soap, made from olive oil rather than animal fat. This soap was gentler on expensive fabrics, like silk and fine wool, and it cost 6 to 8 times more than basic soap. For particularly delicate items, even more expensive specialty soaps might be used. The washing process for noble clothes involved multiple stages and careful attention to different fabric types. Silk required different treatment than wool, which required different treatment than linen. Professional laundresses knew how to adjust water temperature, soap concentration, and handling techniques for each type of fabric. Delicate items were pre-soaked in lukewarm water with mild soap, then gently agitated by hand rather than beaten. Fine fabrics were never twisted or wrung out forcefully. Instead, they were pressed between clean cloths to remove excess water, then laid flat to dry on specially prepared surfaces. The drying process for noble clothes involved dedicated drying rooms or protected outdoor areas where expensive fabrics wouldn't be damaged by weather or contaminated by dust and dirt. Some items were dried on specially constructed frames that maintained the fabric's shape during the drying process. The total cost of laundry operations for a major noble household could consume 3 to 5% of the annual budget. This included not just soap and fuel, but also the wages of professional laundresses, the maintenance of laundry facilities, and the replacement of items damaged during cleaning. But here's what's really striking about medieval laundry. Both peasants and nobles understood that clean clothes were essential for health and social acceptance. Peasants weren't washing their clothes less frequently because they didn't value cleanliness. They were limited by the enormous physical and economic costs of the process. The difference was that nobles could afford to make laundry someone else's problem, while peasants had to choose between spending a full day on laundry and using that day for other essential activities like food production or income-earning work. Part 5. Waste Management and sanitation, 80 to 100 minutes. Medieval waste management is one of those topics that reveals just how much thought and engineering went into problems that modern people never have to think about. Because when you don't have flush toilets connected to city sewer systems, dealing with human waste becomes a major logistical challenge that requires planning, construction, and ongoing maintenance. Let's start with how peasants handled this problem, because they had to come up with practical solutions using minimal resources and basic construction techniques. The standard peasant toilet was a simple pit latrine, basically a hole in the ground, covered by a wooden structure for privacy and weather protection. These pits were typically 1 to 2 meters deep, though this varied based on soil conditions and the amount of effort the family could invest in digging. The pit was covered with a wooden seat, and the whole structure was enclosed by walls made from whatever materials were available: wood planks, woven branches, or even cloth hangings for privacy. Location was crucial and followed strict rules based on centuries of experience with disease prevention. The latrine had to be at least a bowshot's distance from the house, which meant 100 to 200 meters away. This wasn't arbitrary. People had figured out through trial and error that waste-related diseases were less likely if you kept human waste well away from where you lived and prepared food. The pits also had to be located away from water sources like wells or streams. Medieval people understood, even without modern germ theory, that human waste could contaminate drinking water and cause illness. They might not have understood the mechanism, but they definitely understood the connection between waste location and disease. Maintenance was a community responsibility, since individual families couldn't manage pit cleaning alone. Once a year, usually in late summer when the contents had had time to decompose, the pits would be cleaned out. This was unpleasant work that required multiple people and was often organized as a community effort where everyone contributed labor. The waste wasn't simply discarded, it was valuable as fertilizer. Human waste was systematically collected and composted for use in agriculture. This created a closed loop where waste became a resource which was essential in an economy where nothing could be wasted. Some peasant communities built shared latrines serving multiple families. These were larger structures with multiple seats, and they required more complex organization for maintenance and cleaning. Shared facilities allowed communities to pool resources for construction and upkeep, while still maintaining the necessary distance from living areas. Noble waste management was an entirely different level of engineering sophistication that resembled modern plumbing more than peasant pit latrines. Large castles and noble estates featured garderobe systems, essentially medieval flush toilets that used water flow and gravity to carry waste away from living areas. These garderobes were built into castle walls with stone-lined chutes that carried waste down multiple stories to collection points below. The chutes were angled and smooth-walled to ensure efficient waste transport, and they often emptied into moats or specially constructed cesspits well away from the main buildings. Some garderobe systems were remarkably sophisticated. They included water flow systems that used diverted streams or specially constructed water supplies to flush waste through the chutes. The water flow helped prevent accumulation and odors while carrying waste to disposal areas where it could decompose safely. Privacy and comfort were built into noble waste management systems. Garderobes often featured stone seating that was shaped for comfort, and some even had dual seats for social interaction. Apparently, medieval nobles sometimes conducted business while using the toilet together. which gives you some insight into medieval attitudes toward privacy. Professional maintenance was provided by specialized workers called gong farmers, who were paid 3 times the wages of ordinary laborers to clean and maintain waste systems. This was dangerous, unpleasant work that required specialized knowledge and equipment, but it was essential for keeping the systems functional. The cesspits that collected waste from garderobe systems were engineering marvels in their own right. These were stone-lined pits that could be 2 to 4 meters deep and were strategically located for easy access by cleaning crews while remaining well away from water sources and living areas. Some noble estates developed waste management into revenue streams. The collected waste was sold as fertilizer to agricultural operations, creating income that helped offset the costs of system maintenance. This required organizing collection, transport, and sales, essentially turning waste management into a small business operation. The scale of noble waste management systems was impressive. Archaeological evidence from 104 medieval cesspits analyzed by researchers shows that these systems handled the waste from hundreds of people, not just the noble family, but all the servants, guards, and other personnel who lived and worked in major castles and estates. Water management was integrated with waste management in sophisticated ways. Separate water sources were designated for drinking versus cleaning, with careful attention to preventing cross-contamination. Some systems included settling tanks and filtration systems that improved water quality and reduced the risk of waste-related contamination. The engineering principles behind medieval waste management were sound and remained in use for centuries. The focus on distance from living areas, water source protection, and systematic removal and disposal created systems that were effective at preventing disease and maintaining sanitation standards. What's really remarkable is that both peasant and noble waste management systems were based on the same basic understanding of sanitation principles. Both groups understood that human waste needed to be kept away from food and water. That location was crucial for health, and that regular maintenance was essential for system functionality. The difference was in the resources available for implementation. Peasants used simple, labor-intensive methods that required community cooperation and personal effort. Nobles invested in complex engineering systems that provided convenience and comfort while handling the same basic sanitation needs. Part 6. Water access and treatment, 100 to 120 minutes. Water was the foundation of all medieval hygiene, and obtaining clean, safe water was a constant challenge that required significant time, effort, and resources. The methods people use to access and treat water reveal a sophisticated understanding of water, quality, and safety that developed through centuries of trial and error. Peasant water access was a daily challenge that consumed significant time and energy. Most peasant families relied on communal wells that served entire villages or neighborhoods. These wells were typically 5 to 15 meters deep, though some reached greater depths in areas where the water table was low. Well construction was a community effort that required pooling resources and labor. Digging a well by hand to depths of 10 to 15 meters was dangerous, difficult work that could take weeks or months to complete. The well shaft had to be lined with stones to prevent collapse, and this required skilled construction techniques and substantial amounts of stone. Water collection from communal wells was organized to prevent conflicts and ensure fair access. Communities developed scheduling systems where different families had designated times for water collection, and there were often rules about the maximum amount each family could take during periods of scarcity. the physical work of water collection was substantial. Water is heavy, about 8 pounds per gallon, and peasant families needed dozens of gallons daily for drinking, cooking, and basic hygiene. This meant multiple trips to the well each day, carrying heavy containers over distances that could be hundreds of meters. Peasants also collected rainwater whenever possible, using wooden barrels and other containers placed to catch runoff from roofs. This water was softer than well water and better for washing clothes and hair, though it required filtration to remove debris and was only available during certain seasons. Natural water sources like rivers and streams provided another option, though peasants understood that flowing water was safer than stagnant water. They preferred to collect water from upstream locations away from areas where animals drank or waste was disposed of, showing practical understanding of contamination risks. Water treatment by peasants was simple but effective. Boiling water for drinking was common practice, especially during times when illness was spreading through the community. They understood that heated water was safer, even without knowing the scientific reasons why. Settling was another common treatment method. Peasants would fill containers with muddy or cloudy water and let them sit until sediment settled to the bottom, then carefully pour off the clearer water from the top. This removed visible particles and improved taste, though it didn't address invisible contamination. Herbal additions served both practical and medicinal purposes. Adding herbs like mint or chamomile to water improved flavor, while potentially providing antibacterial benefits. These herbs were often available through foraging or home gardens, making them accessible to poor families. Noble water access was an entirely different experience that involved complex engineering systems and professional management. Large noble estates invested enormous resources in creating reliable, high-quality water supplies that brought water directly to where it was needed. Deep wells on noble estates were engineering marvels that reached extraordinary depths. The well at Beeston Castle descended 124 meters, deeper than a 40-story building is tall. These wells required professional construction crews, specialized equipment, and months or years to complete. But they provided reliable water supplies even during droughts. Multiple water points throughout noble estates eliminated the need to transport water long distances. Kitchens, bathing areas, and living quarters each had dedicated water access, with some systems including internal distribution networks that carried water through walls and floors. Gravity-fed water systems used elevation changes to create water pressure, allowing nobles to have running water in their castles and manor houses centuries before municipal water systems became common. These systems required careful engineering to ensure proper flow rates and consistent pressure. Lead pipe systems in some noble estates provided pressurized water delivery that resembled modern plumbing. These pipes carried water from elevated storage tanks to various locations throughout buildings, providing convenient access without the need for servants to carry water constantly. Cisterns and settling tanks improved water quality by allowing sediment to settle and providing opportunities for filtration. Some noble estates built elaborate multi-stage systems where water passed through several treatment processes before reaching taps and storage areas. Professional water management included specialists whose job was ensuring water quality and system maintenance. Some royal households employed water tasters, whose responsibility was testing water safety, while maintenance crews kept distribution systems functioning properly. Water heating systems in noble estates provided hot water on demand for bathing and other purposes. These systems included dedicated furnaces for heating water, insulated storage tanks for maintaining temperature, and distribution networks that carried hot water to where it was needed. The cost differences between peasant and noble water access were enormous. Nobles invested 10 to 15 pounds annually in water system maintenance, more than most peasants earned in a year. Meanwhile, peasants devoted 30 to 60 minutes daily to water collection and transport, plus significant costs for fuel to heat water. Water quality standards were surprisingly sophisticated across all social classes. Both peasants and nobles understood that clear, odorless water was preferable to cloudy or smelly water. They knew that moving water was safer than stagnant water, and that certain sources were more reliable than others. Seasonal variations affected water access for everyone. During dry periods, wells might fail, or water levels might drop significantly. During wet seasons, water sources could become contaminated with runoff. Both peasants and nobles had to plan for these variations and develop backup water sources. Storage and preservation of water was essential, since collecting water was time-consuming and couldn't always be done when convenient. Peasants used wooden barrels, ceramic pots, and other containers to store water for later use, while nobles had dedicated storage rooms with large capacity containers. The preference for certain types of water reveals medieval understanding of water quality differences. Rainwater was preferred for hair washing because it was naturally soft. Spring water was valued for drinking because it was naturally filtered. River water was used for heavy cleaning because it was abundant and easily accessible. Regional differences in water access created variations in hygiene practices across medieval France. Areas with abundant natural springs could support higher standards of cleanliness, while regions with limited water resources had to develop more conservative approaches to water use. What's remarkable about medieval water management is how well people understood water quality and safety principles without modern scientific knowledge. Through observation and experience, they developed effective methods for accessing, treating, and storing water that allowed them to maintain hygiene standards despite significant technological limitations. Part 7. Products, Materials, and Trade Networks, 120 to 140 minutes. The materials used for medieval hygiene reveal a fascinating picture of international trade, local production, and social stratification that connected French villages to markets as distant as the Middle East and Africa. What people used to stay clean depended not just on their personal wealth, but on complex networks of merchants, craftsmen, and traders who brought materials across vast distances. Let's start with what peasants could access, because their hygiene materials had to be either locally produced or incredibly cheap to transport. Most peasant soap was made at home using wood ash and animal fat, ingredients that cost almost nothing and could be produced from materials that every household already had. Wood ash came from daily cooking and heating fires, so it was essentially free. You'd save the ash from burning hardwood, leach it with water to extract the lye, and then boil this lye with animal fat until it formed a crude soap. The fat came from whatever animals the family slaughtered for food. So again, this was using materials that would otherwise be discarded. The soap-making process was time-consuming and required skill to get the proportions right. Too much lye, and the soap would be harsh enough to damage skin and clothes. Too little lye, and the mixture wouldn't saponify properly and wouldn't clean effectively. Peasant women learned soap-making techniques from their mothers, and passed them down through generations. Local herbs provided scenting and medicinal benefits for peasant hygiene products. Lavender, mint, chamomile, and sage could be gathered wild or grown in small gardens, and these herbs served multiple purposes: scenting soap, making rinses for hair and mouth care, and providing what people believed were medicinal benefits for skin and overall health. Creative substitutions were common when traditional materials weren't available. Soapwort plants could be used as soap substitutes. When crushed and mixed with water, they produced a natural lather that was gentler than lye soap. Human urine was collected and aged for use in laundry because the ammonia helped break down stains and grease. Vinegar mixed with ash created cleaning solutions for different purposes. These alternative materials required knowledge and skill to use effectively. Peasants had to know which plants could substitute for expensive materials, how to prepare them properly, and when to use them for best results. This knowledge was passed down through communities and represented generations of experimentation and refinement. Regional variations in available materials created different hygiene practices across France. Southern regions had access to olive oil, which made better soap than animal fat. Areas near salt deposits could afford to use salt more liberally for dental care and food preservation. Coastal regions had access to seaweed and other marine materials that had cleaning properties. Transportation costs meant that even relatively inexpensive materials could become costly if they had to travel long distances. Salt, which was cheap near salt works, became expensive in inland areas. Olive oil from the Mediterranean was affordable in southern France, but extremely costly in northern regions. Now let's talk about the luxury hygiene materials available to nobles, because this is where medieval trade networks really become visible. Noble hygiene products came from across the known world and represented some of the most expensive consumer goods available in medieval markets. Castile soap, made with olive oil from Spain, was the gold standard of medieval soap. This soap was gentle, long-lasting, and pleasant to use, but it cost 6 to 8 times more than basic soap. The olive oil had to be shipped from Spain, processed by skilled soap makers, and transported again to markets throughout France. Even more exotic was Aleppo soap from the Middle East, made with olive oil and laurel oil. This soap was considered the finest available and cost more than most peasants earned in a month. The materials and finished product had to travel thousands of miles through multiple middlemen, each adding their markup to the final price. Marseille soap represented France's own emerging luxury soap industry. By 1370, Marseille had developed sophisticated soap-making operations that competed with Spanish and Middle Eastern products. These operations required imported olive oil, skilled craftsmen, and significant capital investment, but they created a domestic luxury soap industry. Scenting materials for noble hygiene products came from even more distant sources. Musk came from deer in Central Asia, civet from cats in Africa, and ambergris from whales in various oceans. These materials cost more than their weight in gold and were used in tiny quantities to scent soaps, perfumes, and bath preparations. Spices for dental care and personal grooming were imported from India, Southeast Asia, and other distant regions. Cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, and other exotic spices were ground into tooth powders, mixed into perfumes, and used in various beauty preparations. The cost was astronomical. A pound of good cinnamon could cost more than a skilled craftsman's annual wages. Professional tool making created another category of expensive hygiene products for nobles. ivory combs carved with religious scenes or family, coats of arms, were works of art as much as functional tools. Silver tweezers, razors, and other grooming implements were custom made by skilled metalworkers and often passed down through generations as valuable heirlooms. The economic impact of luxury hygiene products was significant enough to affect international trade patterns. French nobles' demand for exotic soaps, perfumes, and grooming materials created profitable trade routes and supported merchant communities throughout Europe and beyond. Trade regulations and guild systems controlled the production and distribution of hygiene products. Soap makers in major cities formed guilds that set quality standards, controlled prices, and regulated who could practice the trade. These guilds ensured consistent quality, but also maintained high prices by limiting competition. Quality variations within product categories meant that even basic items like soap came in multiple grades. The cheapest soap was harsh and purely functional, while mid-grade soap was gentler and lasted longer. Premium soap was scented, colored, and pleasant to use. Ultra-luxury soap was essentially a decorative item as much as a cleaning product. Storage and preservation of expensive hygiene materials required special care. Imported soaps had to be kept dry and cool to prevent spoilage. Perfumes and scented oils needed proper containers to prevent evaporation. Spices for dental care had to be protected from moisture and pests. The seasonal nature of some trade routes affected the availability and pricing of hygiene materials. Winter weather could disrupt shipping and make certain products unavailable for months. Spring arrivals of merchant caravans would bring new supplies, but often at premium prices after months of scarcity. Local production of hygiene materials supported domestic craftsmen and reduced dependence on imports. French soap makers gradually developed skills and techniques that allowed them to compete with foreign products. This created employment and kept more money within local economies rather than sending it to distant suppliers. The social signaling aspect of hygiene materials was as important as their functional benefits. Using expensive imported soap wasn't just about getting cleaner, it was about demonstrating wealth, status, and connections to international trade networks. The choice of hygiene products communicated social position as clearly as clothing or housing. Innovation in hygiene products was driven by competition between suppliers and demand from wealthy customers. Soap makers experimented with new combinations of oils and scents. Perfumers developed new formulations, and tool makers created increasingly elaborate grooming implements. The knowledge required to properly use luxury hygiene products was itself a mark of sophistication. Knowing how to blend perfumes, which soaps were appropriate for different purposes, and how to maintain expensive grooming tools required education and experience that separated nobles from peasants who used simple, single-purpose materials. What's fascinating about medieval hygiene materials is how they reveal the global nature of medieval trade and the sophisticated consumer culture that existed among the wealthy. These weren't just cleaning products. They were luxury goods that connected French nobles to producers and suppliers across 3 continents and demonstrated the complex economic networks that supported medieval aristocratic life. Part 8. Bathhouses, Religion, and Social Dynamics, 140 to 160 minutes. Public bathhouses represent one of the most fascinating aspects of medieval social life because they were places where the usual rigid class distinctions of medieval society were both maintained and temporarily suspended. These establishments served as healthcare centers, entertainment venues, and social hubs, all rolled into one, creating complex dynamics that reveal a lot about medieval attitudes toward the body, cleanliness, and social interaction. Let's start with how bathhouses actually operated, because they were much more sophisticated businesses than you might expect. Most medieval towns of any size had multiple bathhouses, and these were regulated by guild systems that controlled everything from pricing to operating hours to service standards. The basic pricing structure was standardized across most of France. Steam baths cost 2 deniers, which was affordable for working people, but still represented a significant expense. Full baths cost 4 deniers, which put them out of reach for the poorest people, but accessible to skilled craftsmen and successful peasants. For comparison, a common laborer might earn 2 to 4 pence daily, so a full bath represented a day's wages. Operating hours were strictly regulated for both practical and moral reasons. Bathhouses couldn't open before daybreak, partly for security reasons, and partly because early morning hours were reserved for religious observances. They had to close by sunset for similar reasons, and they were completely closed on major religious holidays. The facilities themselves were more elaborate than simple washing areas. Most bathhouses featured multiple pools or tubs of different temperatures, allowing customers to move from hot to warm to cool water as part of their bathing routine. Steam rooms provided intense heat that was believed to open pores and improve the cleaning process. But bathhouses were much more than just places to get clean. They functioned as social centers where people gathered to gossip, conduct business, and enjoy entertainment. Many bathhouses served elaborate meals, and customers might spend entire afternoons eating, bathing, playing games, and socializing with friends and neighbors. The entertainment aspect was significant. Bathhouses often employed musicians, storytellers, and other performers to entertain customers while they bathed. Some establishments featured gaming areas where people could play dice, chess, or other popular games. The atmosphere was more like a modern spa or social club than a simple washing facility. Medical services were commonly available at bathhouses because the warm, humid environment was considered beneficial for various health conditions. Barber surgeons often maintained practices at bathhouses, offering services like bloodletting, tooth extraction, wound treatment, and other medical procedures. This combination of bathing and medical care made bathhouses accessible healthcare centers for people who couldn't afford private physicians. The services were less expensive than visiting university-trained doctors, and the combination of bathing and medical treatment was thought to be particularly effective for certain conditions. Gender segregation in bathhouses evolved over time and varied by location. Early medieval bathhouses often featured mixed-gender bathing, which was accepted as normal social interaction. However, during the 13th and 14th centuries, increasing religious and moral concerns led to gradual separation of male and female bathing times or areas. The church's attitude toward bathhouses was complex and often contradictory. Official church doctrines supported cleanliness as necessary for health and spiritual preparation, and many church leaders recognized that bathhouses served important social and medical functions. However, church authorities were concerned about the moral activities that sometimes occurred at bathhouses. The main concerns were related to prostitution and sexual activity, which were common at many bathhouses. Some establishments essentially functioned as brothels that happened to also offer bathing services. Church authorities tried to regulate these activities through moral penalties and local laws, but enforcement was inconsistent. Interestingly, the church often overlooked or tolerated these moral issues because authorities believed that controlled outlets for sexual activity prevented worse social problems. The attitude seemed to be that bathhouses, even with their moral complications, were preferable to having no organized spaces for social interaction and stress relief. Class distinctions persisted within bathhouses despite the shared experience of public bathing. Wealthy customers could afford private rooms, premium services, and elaborate meals while bathing. They might bring their own servants to attend them, and they certainly used higher quality soaps and oils than common customers. Working class customers used shared facilities and basic services, but they still participated in the social aspects of bathhouse culture. The difference was in the quality and privacy of services, rather than in fundamental access to bathing and social interaction. Some bathhouses catered specifically to wealthy clientele and charged premium prices for luxury services. These establishments featured more elaborate facilities, better food and entertainment, and more exclusive social environments. They were essentially private clubs that used bathing as the organizing principle for social gathering. The social networking that occurred at bathhouses was significant for medieval business and community life. People made business deals, arranged marriages, shared news and gossip, and maintained social relationships through regular bathhouse visits. For many people, bathhouses were their primary social outlet, outside of work and family obligations. Seasonal patterns affected bathhouse use significantly. During winter months, when heating water at home was expensive and difficult, bathhouse attendance increased dramatically. Summer brought decreased use as people could bathe in rivers and streams more easily. Economic cycles also affected bathhouse business. During prosperous times, people could afford more frequent visits and premium services. During hard times, bathhouse attendance dropped as people prioritized spending on food and basic necessities over bathing and social activities. The decline of bathhouses began in the 14th and 15th centuries due to multiple factors. Increasing religious conservatism made public bathing seem morally questionable to more people. The Black Death and other epidemic diseases made large gatherings seem dangerous. Economic changes also affected people's ability to spend money on what were considered luxury services. But during their peak period in the 13th and early 14th centuries, bathhouses were integral parts of medieval urban life. They provided services that people couldn't easily access at home, created opportunities for social interaction across class lines, and supported local economies through employment and business activity. The regulation of bathhouses reveals how medieval authorities tried to balance moral concerns with practical needs. They recognized that these establishments served important social and health functions, but they also tried to control the activities that occurred there through laws, penalties, and oversight. What's really fascinating about medieval bathhouses is how they demonstrate the sophisticated social infrastructure that existed in medieval towns. These weren't primitive facilities. They were complex businesses that provided multiple services and created social spaces that served important community functions. The religious attitudes toward bathhouses also reveal the complexity of medieval church doctrine regarding the body and cleanliness. The church wasn't uniformly opposed to bathing or physical pleasure, but it was concerned about maintaining moral standards and preventing sinful behavior. The eventual decline of bathhouses represents a significant change in medieval social life. As private bathing became more accessible to wealthy people and public bathing became associated with moral concerns, an important social institution gradually disappeared, taking with it a unique form of community interaction that wouldn't be replaced until much later periods. Conclusion: the economics of medieval cleanliness, 160 to 170 minutes. So here we are, after nearly 3 hours of examining every possible detail of how medieval French people stayed clean, and what emerges is a picture that's much more complex and sophisticated than the popular image of universally filthy medieval peasants rolling around in mud. The reality is that medieval people understood cleanliness just as well as we do. They knew that washing your face daily was important. They knew that clean clothes were necessary for health and social acceptance. They knew that bathing regularly made them feel better and prevented various problems. They knew that clean teeth were important for eating and speaking properly. The difference wasn't in knowledge or desire. It was purely economic. Every single hygiene practice we've discussed was available to every social class, but the quality, frequency, and comfort of these practices depended entirely on how much money you had to spend on them. A peasant could wash his face every morning, but he had to use cold water and harsh soap that removed skin along with dirt. A noble could wash his face every morning with warm rose water and gentle imported soap applied by professional servants. Both men ended up with clean faces, but one experienced it as a grim necessity, while the other enjoyed it as a pleasant luxury. The proportional cost burden reveals the true inequality of medieval hygiene. Peasants spent 15 to 20% of their income on basic hygiene materials and fuel, while nobles spent only 3 to 5% of their much larger incomes on vastly superior hygiene facilities and services. The poor paid more for less, while the rich paid less for more, a pattern that's depressingly familiar even today. But what's remarkable is how much medieval people accomplished within their economic constraints. Peasants developed effective soap-making techniques using free materials. They created tooth-cleaning methods that were actually more effective than what many people used centuries later. They built waste management systems that prevented disease and created valuable agricultural resources. Nobles used their resources to develop sophisticated engineering systems that provided running water, flush toilets, and heated bathing facilities centuries before these became common. They supported international trade networks that brought luxury hygiene products from across the known world. They employed professional specialists whose entire careers focused on perfecting hygiene practices. The social signaling aspect of medieval hygiene was crucial for understanding how these practices functioned in daily life. Hygiene wasn't just about getting clean. It was about demonstrating your social position, your economic resources, and your cultural sophistication. The soap you used, the frequency of your bathing, and the quality of your grooming tools all communicated information about your place in society. This social function of hygiene helped drive innovation and trade. Nobles' demand for exotic soaps and perfumes created profitable trade routes and supported craftsmen throughout Europe and beyond. The desire to distinguish themselves from lower classes motivated continuous refinement and elaboration of hygiene practices. The religious context added another layer of complexity to medieval hygiene. The church supported cleanliness as spiritually and physically necessary, but it was concerned about the moral implications of focusing too much attention on bodily pleasure. This created a framework where hygiene was encouraged, but had to be practiced within acceptable moral boundaries. Gender differences in hygiene practices reflected broader social expectations about male and female roles. Women were expected to spend more time and attention on appearance and cleanliness, while men's hygiene was more focused on basic functionality. However, both genders across all social classes maintained daily hygiene routines adapted to their economic circumstances. The technological sophistication of medieval hygiene systems is genuinely impressive. The engineering required to provide running water to castles, the chemistry involved in soap making, and the planning required for waste management systems all demonstrate capabilities that are often underestimated in popular understanding of the medieval period. Regional variations in hygiene practices reflected the geographic and economic diversity of medieval France. Southern regions with access to olive oil developed different soap-making traditions than northern areas that relied on animal fats. Coastal areas had access to marine materials, while inland regions used forest products for hygiene purposes. The decline of certain hygiene practices, particularly public bathhouses, reveals how social and religious changes could override economic and practical considerations. Even when services were useful and popular, changing moral attitudes and disease concerns could eliminate entire social institutions. What's perhaps most interesting is how medieval hygiene practices reveal the fundamental human drive for cleanliness and social acceptance. Despite enormous economic and technological constraints, people found ways to stay clean, smell pleasant, and present themselves appropriately to their communities. The specific methods varied dramatically based on available resources, but the underlying motivation remained constant across all social levels. The legacy of medieval hygiene practices influenced later developments in surprising ways. Many of the soap-making techniques, waste management principles, and water treatment methods developed during this period continued to be used for centuries. The social institutions built around hygiene, particularly bathhouses, created precedents for later public health initiatives. Modern people often look back at medieval hygiene with a mixture of fascination and horror, but the reality is that medieval people were dealing with the same basic human needs that we face today. They just had to solve these problems using 13th century technology and economic systems rather than modern infrastructure and manufacturing. The sophisticated understanding of hygiene principles demonstrated by medieval people across all social classes suggests that human knowledge about cleanliness and health is much older and more universal than we often assume. The specific technologies and materials change, but the fundamental understanding of what bodies need to stay healthy remains remarkably consistent across time and cultures. So the next time you turn on a faucet and hot water comes out instantly, or you squeeze some gentle soap from a plastic bottle, or you flush a toilet and never think about where the waste goes, remember that you're benefiting from centuries of human innovation and investment in solving the same basic problems that challenged every medieval person who ever tried to wash their face on a cold winter morning. And with that thought, which is neither exciting nor dramatic, nor likely to keep anyone awake, we conclude our detailed examination of how medieval French people managed to stay clean, despite living in a world that made cleanliness expensive, difficult, and sometimes genuinely dangerous. Sleep well and be grateful for modern plumbing.